Okay. The question here says the diagram shows three possible tax schemes. What can be concluded about these three tax schemes, right? On the y-axis, you have the amount of tax paid, and on the x-axis, you have amount of personal income. So how much someone is earning and how much is the tax that they are paying. So the options here say X is more progressive than Z. X, Y, and Z are all proportional. Y is only proportional tax, and Z is more regressive than Y. Right. Okay, so what do you think? So higher the personal income of someone, higher the personal income of a person, higher the tax amount, right? So all three are directly proportional, right? Higher the income that someone is earning, higher the amount of tax that they pay. But out of these three graphs, as you can see, X is most steep, then it's Y, and then it's Z, right? So which option do you think is correct? Y is progressive. Y is progressive, but why not X and Z? Don't you think that X and Z are also progressive? Because higher the income, higher the amount of tax that they pay. Are you getting me? So, Abdul, I think it would be, the answer should be, what do you think? I think A is correct. Yeah, I also think it's A, because the thing is that, as you know, what is progressive tax? So progressive tax is higher the higher the income, higher the tax rate. Higher the income, higher the tax rate, right? So we aren't provided the tax rate over here, but we are provided tax paid. How much is the amount of tax that they're paying, right? So since X is most steep, right? So X is like this, then you have Y, and then you have Z, right? So we can say that X is most progressive, and then Y, and then Z, right? So let's write this down. So for 15, we think A is the answer. We'll go back and check if that is correct or not. Lines from origin are progressive, downward sloping is regressive. Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. Okay, now let's move on. Okay, so the next question says the diagram shows an initial market equilibrium for an agricultural product of $6 and 800 units, right? So straight vertical line is your supply curve, normal down sloping is your demand curve, right? The two curves are intersecting at this point where the equilibrium price is $6 and equilibrium quantity is $800. How much will the government have to spend to increase the market price to $10? How much will the government have to spend to increase the market price to $10? Yeah, how much the government have to spend to increase the market price. So how will the market price increase? So think about this. How will the market price increase? The market price will increase when the demand curve is like this. When the demand curve is intersecting at this point, only then your market price will be like this. Are you getting me? Okay. If that is true, then you have to shift the demand curve to the right. You have to shift the demand curve to the right. Now, how much amount? Right now, it is 800 into 6 is 4,800, right? So the demand is increasing by 400 units, and 400 times 10 would be 4,000. I think that's the answer, but you think C, 8,000 minus 1,400. So 10 times 8 is 8,000, and 6 times 800 is 4,800. So you took the difference. You took the difference. Okay, fair enough, fair enough. I used a different approach. I am thinking that the answer would be 4,000. Why? Because think about this. The new price would then be $10 per unit, right? So $10, and how much is the additional amount that the government would be spending? Think about this. I think that it would be $400 additional that you're spending, right? $400 additional that you will be spending. Are you getting me? And each unit would be for $10. So that is what makes me think that it would be 4,000. So I think it's D. I'm not really sure. Are you getting me? But we'll look at the answer and then we'll discuss it later. So you are saying for 16, you are saying it's C, and I'm saying it's D. So we'll come back. What if government decreases supply to 400? The price will be no. Yeah, that's a good question. That's an excellent question, I believe. But the thing is, think about this. We have a clear hint over here. How much will the government have to spend to increase the market price to $10? How much the government have to spend, right? Decreasing supply is definitely an option, but in that case, we know if the government is decreasing supply, so that would be through indirect taxes or something, right? So that is not an option because the question is saying that how much the government has to spend. So it means that they are spending more, so the demand has to increase. That's my reasoning behind it. Does it make sense? Why will the government increase price? To subsidize? Yeah, to increase the revenue. Basically, think about this. Yes, that's a good question. Agricultural product, right? So oftentimes the government want to artificially increase the demand so that first thing that they can store for the future use, and secondly, that will increase the income of the farmers. Because I mean, you would know that demand, wheat and other agricultural products are very basic necessities. So government doesn't want to be in a situation when the country has run out of these basic items. So that's the additional amount is stored for future and so on. Make sense? Okay. So the table identifies items of government and government annual spending, right? Government annual spending. What will be the government expenditure on transfer payment? What will be the government expenditure on transfer payment? This is exactly the question that you were asking me yesterday, whether pension are part of transfer payments or not. So farming subsidies, pension payments, welfare benefits. Right. So if we add these three up, so that would give you 90 and 50, 140. So there's no option of 140. If we add just the farming in this, then it gives you expenditure and transfer payments, civil servant salaries, farming subsidies, transfer payments. Right. Right. Interesting. Very interesting. What do you think? No, that's not a transfer payment. No, think about this. So by definition, transfer payment is anything when you're facilitating the poor. So what is transfer payment? Think about this. So transfer payment is, if you remember, when the government wants to create more equal income distribution, government takes taxes from the rich, right? And then give it to the poor in the form of transfer payment. And transfer payments are, any money directly or indirectly spent on people who are in need of it. How so? Like income support program, unemployment benefits, child support program, right? And things like that. So the salaries, the salaries that the government officials are earning, that's what they have earned by working, right? So it's not that they're getting that money for free. So that won't be transfer payment, right? Sorry, I wanted to write poor, right? So, and the way this happens is through transfer payments. Okay, now the thing is, I think the transfer payment, even subsidies are not part of transfer payments. And so your answer would be the pensions that the government is paying and the welfare benefits. So that should be B. What do you think? That's my opinion. Right. Right. It doesn't only affect the poor. Right. Exactly. So 17, we are thinking of 17 is, just a second, 17 is B. Okay, great. Let's keep moving. Okay, the next question here says 18th. Where is it? Okay, so the question 18 is saying a subsidy is given to the producers of a good with perfectly elastic demand. A subsidy is given to producers of a good with perfectly elastic demand. What will be the outcome? Perfectly elastic demand, right? Consumers and producers receive equal amounts of subsidy. There will be no change in price and the incident subsidy will fall on the producers. There will be a large increase in quantity consumed. The incident subsidy will fall on the consumer. There will be no change in quantity consumed. The incident subsidy will fall on the consumer. Which one do you think is correct? But there's no point to subsidize product with perfectly elastic demand as substitutes are available. That's a good point. That's a good point. But over here, yeah, absolutely. right? So perfectly elastic demand, you're right with saying that perfectly elastic demand means that there are a lot of substitutes available for that good, right? But we have to imagine if that is happening, right? So obviously the question is just trying to test your critical thinking skills, like how will you be able to solve this, right? So have a look at this perfectly elastic demand. So you have price on the y-axis, you have quantity demanded of the good on the x-axis. If this is the demand curve, this is perfectly elastic, yes or no? So this straight horizontal line is perfectly elastic demand curve, which shows you what? Which shows you that at this price level, you can demand as much quantity of the good. You can demand as much quantity of the good as much you want to, right? But the price won't change. Okay. Now, for this type of demand curve, no matter what the normal, normal supply curve is, so price level will always stay the same. So let's say if this was the original supply curve, this was your original equilibrium point. So this much was the quantity that was originally consumed. Yes or no? And how much was the price? Price was at this level. Then let's assume that subsidy is provided and the supply curve, we know in subsidy, the cost of production decreases and the supply curve will shift to the right. Now the new supply curve and your demand curve will be intersecting at this point. So this will become your new equilibrium. You can see that equilibrium quantity has increased from Q1 to Q2, right? And this is your new equilibrium. So we can label it as E2, but the price level has stayed the same. The price level has stayed the same. And who is the one who is getting the benefit? Since price hasn't decreased, so the entire benefit of subsidy goes to producers. The entire benefit of subsidy goes to producers, right? Because the price level did not change. No change in consumer surplus. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Right. So now what's the idea here? So which of the options do you think is correct? Out of these four, which option do you think is correct? Yeah. Which option do you think is correct? Okay. Yeah, sure. Sure. Have a look at this. So consumer and producer surplus, think about this, the demand, consumer surplus shows the benefit that consumers get from their participation in the market. And similarly, producer surplus shows the benefit that producers get from their participation in the market. So on the y-axis, you always have the price. On the x-axis, you have quantity of the good. So downward sloping is your normal demand curve. Upward sloping is your normal supply curve, right? Just a second. So normal upward sloping is your supply curve like this, right? Now the equilibrium point is where the supply and demand curves intersect. So this is your equilibrium point. So this is your equilibrium point. So area below demand curve and above price, below demand curve and above price, which is basically this entire region. So this is your consumer surplus. So this is your consumer surplus, and on the other hand, producer surplus is area below price. So this is the price level below price and above supply, below price and above supply. So that would be your producer surplus. So this upper one is, sorry about that, this is consumer surplus, and this bottom one is your producer surplus. B. Okay, so you think it's B. Let's see. There's no change in price and the incidence of tax will fall on the producer. Absolutely, absolutely. I also think B is correct. So let's enter 18 as B. Okay, great, perfect. Let's keep moving. The next question says that primary income and secondary income are components of the current account of the balance of payment. What do these represent? What do these represent? Right. So if you remember, we said that there are four components of current account. There are four components of current account: trade in goods, trade in services, income, and current transfers. Now, which of these four components are defined as primary income and secondary income? So I might not have explained you in the class, but let me tell you right now. If you know the answer, you can just tell me. If you don't know the answer, I can explain you right now. So yeah. No. Okay, think about this. So let me explain you over here. So it's just a word. It's just a terms. There are few terms, as I said, in economics that you need to remember. So the four components that you have in current account are trade in goods, right, which shows exports and imports of goods. Then you have trade and services, which shows you exports and imports of services. Then you have income, and then you have current transfers. Then you have income, and then you have current, then you have current transfers. Right. Okay. Now think about this. Income and current transfers. Okay. Now, trade in goods is also known as visible balance. Why is that known as visible balance? Because obviously tangible goods are always visible, right? So it's just a short form or another word that you use for it. So this is known as visible balance, right? Then trade and services, which records exports and imports of services, is also known as invisible balance, right? It is known as invisible balance. Then you have income. Income is known as primary income, right? What does income record? Let me tell you. So income records the income that locals are earning on foreign held assets. What type of assets? So let's say if Pakistani has property in USA, UK, and they're earning some rent on that. Similarly, if there's a Pakistani national who has a business in a foreign country, so whatever profit that thing earns, and similarly, if a Pakistani has invested any money in the stock exchange in a foreign country, so all these things are income from Pakistan point of view, and those will be recorded as inflows. On the other hand, if any foreigner like non-Pakistani has some assets or businesses running in Pakistan, and whatever income that generates, that would be considered as outflow because the money will be going out to the other country, right? So this is known as primary income. And current transfers, which records basically government level transactions like receiving and receiving and giving aid and so on and so forth, that is known as secondary income, right? So these are the four components. So now you would remember that income is known as primary income and current transfer is known as secondary income. Right, exactly. Financial remittance, exactly, absolutely. Right? So the answer then in this case would be primary income. You just discussed that will be income flows, and secondary income will be current transfers. So the 19 should be C. Sorry, you asked me a question. So basically think about this. So what is the difference between primary and secondary? It's just name given to it. So primary means something that is more important, and secondary mean that is not very important. So what is a bigger chunk? So the names are coming from the fact that income is a bigger amount, because think about this. In Pakistan's case, yes, there might be more remittance coming in, but generally for most countries, income is a bigger component. Why? Because it shows the income that you're earning on foreign held assets. So if any Pakistani has any asset, as we just discussed, in a foreign country and they're earning some income in that, so that would always be a bigger component compared to transfer payments, because remittances usually, not always, in Pakistan's case, it might be a bigger component, but usually remittances are not that big of an amount as compared to the income that you get. Easy? Is this making sense? Right? So that's why primary means something that is major and secondary means something that's not major. So 19 should be right. Perfect. So 19 is C. Let me write this down. 19, we think 19 is C. Okay, let's keep moving. Okay, the next question says, where is 20? Okay, the diagram shows the original aggregate demand curve and the original aggregate supply curve. The original equilibrium is at X, as we can see. Original aggregate supply, original aggregate demand. What would cause new equilibrium, cause the new equilibrium to be at Y? Now, what is happening in this case? Your aggregate supply curve is shifting to the left. So what are the factors that cause a leftward shift in aggregate supply? We have studied this in the class. Yeah. Okay. So you think it's the increase in import prices. An increase in import prices. Increase in government spending, this will affect aggregate demand. If government spending more on education, then your aggregate demand should increase. Increase in export prices, that should shift the aggregate demand to the left. That's correct. Increase in money supply, we said. Increase in money supply will increase your aggregate demand. So that can't also be the option. So why is C the answer, by the way? What makes you think? Cost push inflation. Excellent, excellent. Yes. So when import prices are increasing, so imports are more expensive, then the raw material that you're importing will be more expensive, and that can result in cost push inflation. Excellent. That's correct. Okay, so the next question says, what is not an example of protectionism? We know protectionism is when countries use trade barriers to stop free trade or to restrict free trade. So it says, what is not an example of protectionism? The European Union requiring goods imported into member states to meet safety standards. The Pakistan government increasing the rate of goods and services tax GST on some exported goods from 2% to 5%. The Nigerian government banning the import of packaged sugar. The US imposing a 35% tariff on tires imported from China. Interesting. So which one do you think? It's A. I also think it's A, right? Because think about this. It's about safety standards. It's more about safety standards that they are doing. In other cases, you are trying to discourage your, either you are trying to discourage imports or you're trying to discourage imports, right? In the other three options. So I think 21 is A, right? So 21 should be A, right? Because when you're imposing safety standards, that is a different thing altogether. When you're imposing safety standards, that's a different thing altogether. Okay, now the next question says 22. Here we go. Right, in a way it is. In a way it is. Yes, that's a very good observation. In a way it is, because that will again discourage your imports, right? But the reason that World Trade Organization provides, and we know World Trade Organization is the is the platform, or you can think of that as the organization that manages and supervises all the international trade taking place between countries. So they haven't defined it. So they still give countries the right to decide whether they want to import a good or not. And if that imported good is not meeting the quality standard, then you can stop that product from being imported. So that doesn't directly classify as a trade barrier. So that's the reason behind it. But otherwise, in a way, it discourages imports. Okay, now the next question here says the table shows annual percentage increases in countries' consumer price index. Which statement is correct? Interesting. Which statement is correct? 2018, due to disinflation, consumer prices on average fell throughout the period. Okay, consumer prices on average, no, that's incorrect. No, the rate of inflation is decreasing, but prices are still increasing. Consumer prices on average remained the same in 2016 and 2017. No, it did increase. The general price level prices was highest in 2015. No, that's incorrect. The general price level was highest at 2018. Exactly. Excellent. Is this clear? So as long as the rate of inflation is positive, prices will still be increasing. Excellent. That's correct. Next question. So 23 is saying, where is it? Okay. The table indicates the factor inputs required to produce wheats and cars in countries X and Y. Unit of factor inputs to produce 1 ton of wheat. So in country X, you need 4 units of input to produce 1 ton of wheat. In country Y, you need 8 units. Similarly, in country X, you need 2 units of input to produce 1 car, and in country Y, you need 6 units to produce 1 car. What makes it possible for both countries to benefit from trade? What makes it possible for both countries to benefit from trade? Country X has absolute advantage in wheat and car production. Country X has absolute advantage in wheat and car production. Okay. Country Y has absolute advantage in wheat and car production. Country Y has comparative advantage in wheat production. Opportunity cost of wheat and car production is the same in both countries. Okay, now this is interesting. First of all, what do you think about option A and option B? What do you think about option A and option B? Comparative is low opportunity cost. Yes, comparative advantage is one country can produce something at a lower opportunity cost, right? Now think about this. Now this is interesting. Have a look at this. So Abdul, country X needs less inputs for both wheat and less inputs for cars. So technically, country X has absolute advantage in production of both wheat and cars. Did you get this part? Excuse me, right? Did you get this part? So since any country that can produce something at a lower, no, okay, let me tell you. So when you can produce something, have a look at this. Let me explain you over here. So when a country can produce something at a lower opportunity cost, think about it. This is country X, this is country X, this is country Y, right? And country, this was wheat, and this is car. So country X was producing wheat in 4 units, this was in 2 units, then this is 6, and this is 8. This is the information that we're provided. What is absolute advantage? Absolute advantage is when you can produce something at a lower cost. Either you can produce something in more quantities or you can produce something at lower cost of production. So that is absolute advantage. Yes or no? Yes or no? Right? Now, if you look at country X, it can produce both the goods. Country X can produce both the goods with lower inputs. So it can produce wheat with just 4 inputs and can produce a car with just 2 inputs. Right? Whereas country Y needs 4 units to produce, because these are units of input. This is not the quantity that you're producing, right? Abdul, did you get it? So this is always tricky, that you have to be careful. Units of input to produce 1 ton of wheat. So if you require lesser units to produce something, this means your cost of production is less. Am I making sense? So if you can produce something at with lower inputs requirements, this means your cost of production is less. So in both the goods, in both the cases, since country X needs less inputs to produce wheat and cars, so X has absolute advantage in both goods. X has absolute advantage in both goods, but comparative advantage will be different. How would comparative advantage be different? How would comparative advantage be different? Let's do the calculation that we have always learned in our classes, right? So this is wheat, this is wheat, and this is car. Okay, have a look at this, students. So in the case of X, it is 4:2, right? Yes or no? If we simplify this, we can divide both sides with 2. We can divide both sides with 2, right? So it will give you, in the case of X, it will give you 1:2. Is it making sense? So what does this 1:2 shows? That to produce 1 unit of car, you have to give up on 2 units of wheat. For country X to produce 1 unit of car, you have to give up on 2 units of wheat. Is it making sense? You'll do the same. So the calculation that we're doing. Okay. So if this would have been, I got a question. So if this would have been the quantity and not the inputs, right? Then whichever of the 2 countries had more output, that's even simpler. So if these are the quantities of the goods that 2 countries are producing, then whichever country is producing more, that is the country that has absolute advantage. So think about this. So now you tell me which country has absolute advantage in which thing. So who can produce more wheat? Right. So Y has absolute advantage in wheat because out of wheat, X can produce 100 units, Y can produce 300 units. Similarly, on the other hand, also in the cars, X can produce 200 units, Y can produce 200 units. So in both the cases, it is the Y that has absolute advantage in both the goods. It can produce more of wheat, it can produce more of cars. Simple. Is it simple? Okay. Now we did the calculation for X. So for X to produce 1 unit of car, they have to give up on 2 units of wheat. In the case of Y, think about this. It is 8:6. So I've always told you that you divide it by the smaller value, right? So that will give you 6 divided by 6 is 1. So this will be 1:, Let me do the calculation here. So 8 divided by 6. How much is 8 divided by 6? Just give me a second. 8 divided by 6 is 1 point something, right? It is 1.333, right? So now you tell me which country has, so this is for Y, right? So to produce 1 unit of car, X has to give up 2 units of wheat, whereas to produce 1 unit of car, Y has to only give up on 1.33 units of Y. So whichever country has lower opportunity cost, that is the country which has the comparative advantage in that good. If Y specializes in wheat, it will produce 600, and for cars, it will produce 800. If Y specializes in wheat, will it produce 600 units? No, 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 no. Not at all. Think about this. Think about it, Abdurrahim. So these values are telling you, these values are showing you how many units of input you need to produce something. How many units of input do you need to produce something? As simple as that, right? Now, if you have, it was 2, just a second, sorry, 4, 2, 6, 8. The units that you need to produce something, you know, the simplification, ratio simplification thing that we did in the class, right? So what we did, we just simplified the ratio. For the X, what we did, so we did, it would be wheat and cars, right? And that gives you, right? So you have to simplify this ratio. You will still simplify it the same way. You still need to simplify it the same way and then analyze. Abdurrahim, stay with me, I'll explain you that, right? So that is 4:2. That's for X, right? So you divide both the sides with 2. So 2 over here and 2 over here. So this gives you 1:2. How much does this give you? 1:2. This means to produce 1 unit of car, X has to give up on 2 units of wheat. Any confusion so far? Any confusion so far? For Y, it would be, 8:6. So you have to simplify this, 8:6. So you divide both sides of the value, both values with 6. So this gives you 1:1.333. In Y's case, you have to give up only 1.33 units of wheat to get 1 unit of car, right? Yes or no? To get 1 unit of car, let's get rid of all the extra stuff, right? To produce 1 unit of car, you have to give up on 1.33 units of wheat. Whereas in the case of X, to produce 1 unit of car, you have to give up 2 units of wheat. So which country has lower opportunity cost for producing cars? Which country? 4:3, right? So which country has a higher, lower opportunity cost for producing cars? So Y has comparative advantage in cars. And I said that for the other country, obviously the other country would have comparative advantage in the other goods. So X has comparative advantage in wheat and Y has comparative advantage in cars. Great. Is this clear now? So country Y has comparative advantage in, oh, that's tricky. We just said that country Y has comparative advantage in, sorry, just a second. So this is for the inputs. This is for the inputs. So you need 1 input to produce car, and you need 1.33 input to produce wheat. Sorry. Just a second. And in the case of X, you need 1 unit to produce cars, and you need 2 units to produce wheat. So for Y, you have, yeah, the input, yeah, true. So you need less inputs. Y need less inputs to produce wheat compared to X. Y needs less inputs to produce opportunity cost. Okay, so I think it will be the reverse. So whichever country needs lesser resources, whichever country needs lesser resources, that is the country, that is the country which would have, you know, just a second. So has absolute advantage, why has absolute advantage? Wait. So the absolute advantage part is clear. Whichever country needs less resources, think about this. Whichever country needs less resources to produce something, that is the country, that has absolute advantage. So in the case of X, think about this. In the case of X, X needs lesser resources to produce wheat, and X need lesser inputs to produce cars compared to Y. So X for sure has absolute advantage in both wheat and cars. X is absolute advantage in both wheat and cars. But why is A not the answer? Why is A not the answer? The A is not the answer because that is not what will benefit the countries. That is not something that will benefit the countries to trade. For the countries to benefit, if one country has absolute advantage in both the things, it is not beneficial. Abdurrahim, we did talk about that because then that means that that country produces both the goods. X will produce both the goods, but what would Y do? What would Y do with its resources? That doesn't make sense. So in our model, one country has to produce one thing and the other country has to produce other thing. So that is why that is not how the countries will benefit. Now coming back to the comparative advantage thing, think about this. Let me think again over it. So since it needs less resources, since Y needs less resources to produce wheat compared to X, right? So Y has comparative advantage. When you can produce something, what is the definition of comparative advantage? When you can produce something with lower opportunity cost. When you can produce something with lower opportunity cost. So comparative advantage says, I think the answer is we went a little wrong, and sorry for confusing you about this, but comparative advantage in the case of inputs will be when a country can produce something with less use of resources compared to the other country. When a country can produce something with lower opportunity cost. Country can produce something. Are you getting what I'm saying? Let's look at the answer. With lower opportunity cost. With lower opportunity cost. So in this case, when you are using inputs, if a country can produce something with lesser inputs, then that is the country, then that is what it will have. Right. So absolute advantage is clear. So let's look at the answer first. I think it should be C. Why is comparative advantage in wheat production? Opportunity cost is not the same between countries. So yeah. So that is 23. 23 is C. 23 is C. Now have a look at this. Let me explain you again. So have a look at this. Now I know it's very tricky, but let's look at this one more time. So think about this. In the case of, have a look at this. Output, I'll explain you all over again. Output and inputs. So in absolute and comparative advantage, you will be provided one of the two pieces of information. Either you will be shown the output that a country can produce, or you will be shown the inputs that it needs to produce an output. Is this clear so far? So in absolute advantage and comparative advantage, you will be provided two types of information. Either you will be provided the value of the output that X and Y is producing, right? You will be provided the values of two goods that X and Y, whatever the two countries are producing, right? In that case, we know that if a country can produce more output, that is when it has absolute advantage, as simple as that. That is when it can produce more output. So think about this. In the case of wheat, which country can produce more output? In case of wheat, which country can produce more output, right? X. So X has absolute advantage in, sorry, Y, my bad. So Y can produce more output, so Y has absolute advantage in wheat. And for cars, X can produce more output, so X has absolute advantage in cars. As simple as that. Now moving on to the input thing. Whichever country can produce with low resources, whichever country can produce something with low resources, that is the product that it has absolute advantage in. So if X can produce something with 2 inputs and this with 4 inputs, and Y needs 3 and let's say 8, right? So in this case, absolute advantage I'm talking about. If X can produce wheat with 2 inputs, whereas Y needs 3 inputs to produce wheat, so X has absolute advantage in wheat. And similarly for the cars, if X needs 4 units to produce cars, and Y needs 8 units of inputs I'm talking about, to produce cars. So again, X will have absolute advantage in cars, right? So for absolute advantage, here's the rule. We are writing the rule. So have a look at this. For absolute advantage, it should be more quantity or lesser resources. Are you absolutely clear on this? More output means absolute advantage. More output that a country is producing means it has absolute advantage. And if lesser resources needed, right? Or lesser inputs, same thing. Lesser resources needed, lesser resources means absolute advantage. Any confusion so far? This means it is absolute advantage. Easy. Now moving on, great, perfect. Now moving on to the comparative advantage. Now for the comparative advantage, things are different. How so? Let me explain you. So for comparative advantage, again, you can be provided the information in 2 ways. Either they would have given you how much is the output that each of the countries is producing, or they could have given you the input of resources that countries are using, right? Now for the output, think about this, X and Y. We did a very simple thing, that whichever country can produce something at a lower opportunity cost. What is the definition of? Comparative advantage? When a country can produce something with lower opportunity cost. So when a country can produce something with lower opportunity cost, that is when it has comparative advantage, right? Wheat and cars. Okay, is this making sense? So think about this. I'll choose some random values, 3 and 6, and let's say 1 and 2. Okay, have a look at this. Now, in this case, you simplify the ratio of the ring. So for X, how would you simplify the ratios? It's 1:300 ratio 300. So you divide both the sides with 100, the smaller value to get that. So this will give you 1:3. Now, how do we interpret this? We interpret this that to produce 1 unit of wheat, X has to give up on 3 units of cars. To produce 1 unit of wheat, X has to give up on 3 units of cars. Does it make sense? So let me write down, let me make the third column that says ratio. So in the case of X, it's 1:3. Now we do this and this gives us 1:2, because 200 divided by 400 is 1:2. Now you tell me, which country has comparative advantage in which thing? Andre, you tell me which country has comparative advantage in which thing? So these are ratios. So for wheat, X has to give up on 3 units of cars, Y has to give up on 2 units of cars. So Y can produce wheat with lower opportunity cost. Y can produce wheat with lower opportunity cost, only has to give up on 2 units of cars, whereas X has to give up on 3 units of cars. Right? Y has exactly. So for wheat, right? Wheat, which country has absolute advantage? Sorry, comparative advantage in wheat? Y. And for cars, obviously, it will be the other country that will have comparative advantage in the other product. So X will have comparative advantage in cars. Easy? Making sense? right? So for the case of output, so the rule stays lower opportunity cost, lower opportunity cost to produce something is equals to is equals to is equals to comparative is equals to comparative advantage, right? Now let's come to the input scenario. In the case of input, it will be for X, it will be 1:2, right? It will be 1:2, or in fact, we don't even need to do this. In the case of inputs, when we're looking at comparative advantage, you just need to see which country can produce something with lower resources, which country can produce something with lower resources. So if it's X needs 3 inputs to produce wheat, whereas Y needs 1 input to produce wheat. So which country would have comparative advantage, right? So did we do the same way? So in the case of inputs, right? Right. Yeah, just a second. So Y had comparative advantage in because Y needed less to produce. No, we would need to simplify. We would need to simplify, right? Have a look at this. So if we simplify over here, right? So for the wheat, so in the case of X, think about it, it's 3:6. So this gives you 1:2. And in the case of Y, it is already 1:2. This is a slightly wrong example because the ratios are coming out to be same. So no country has comparative advantage in anything. But if we change our values a little bit, so we can do it like this. So let's say 4:10. 4:10. So then in the case of Y, it will be 1:2.5. 1:2.5. Yes or no? So in X case, it's 1:2, and in Y case, it's 1:2, right? So then we know that Y can produce cars, sorry, X can produce cars with lower resources. X can produce cars with lower resources, only 2, whereas Y needs 2.5, right? Is it making sense? Right? And we did the same in the other example as well. So Y had comparative advantage in cars. Sorry, Y had comparative advantage in wheat because in this case it was 1:2, and in this case it was 1:1.333. So compared to X, Y needed less resources to produce wheat. And similarly over here, X needs less resources to produce cars compared to Y. So for this, the rule of thumb would be, so for this case, the rule of thumb would be lesser resources compared to other countries, lesser compared to other country, is equals to comparative advantage. Is making sense? Right? So that is the thing. In the output case, we look at the ratios within the country. So in this case, X has to give up on 3 units of cars to produce 1 wheat, whereas for Y, it has to only give up on 2 units of cars to produce 1 wheat. So Y has lower opportunity cost for producing. Wheat. So Y has comparative advantage in wheat, whereas X has comparative advantage in producing cars. Abdurrahim, are you following me? I know it's very complicated and tricky. And in the case of inputs, what you do is you simplify the ratio and compare it with the other country. So for X, it was turning out to be 1:2. And for Y, it was turning out to be, it was 1:2. And in Y's case, it was turning out to be 1:2.5. So since X needs less resources to produce cars, so X has comparative advantage in cars, whereas Y has comparative advantage in meat. So it's the same thing as we say over here. So for resources thing, whichever country needs less resources to produce something, that is the country that has absolute advantage in that, right? That was quite tricky. Okay, so let's quickly check the answers of the other questions and then we will do the remaining tomorrow, right? So where is it? So 23 we said is C and that is C, right? So for 22. So for 22, let's see what's the answer. So for 22, it's D and we have selected D. That's correct. So 21, it's A and over here, 21 is B. Oh, okay. 21 is B. 21 is B. Whoa, interesting. What is not an example of protectionism? The Pakistan government increasing the rate of goods and services tax GST on some exported goods from 2% to 5%. But if you're putting more exports, so more tax on exports, that is kind of discouraging. That is kind of discouraging that. Right? I don't get why is that? Right. Less imports further. Exactly. Exactly. That is what I'm thinking. So perhaps that would be defined as, voluntary export control. But even voluntary, not export, we are considered non-tariff barriers, which are restrictive trade barriers such as quotas. According to this, it is a trade barrier. Or let's put it out another way. Is export tax barrier subject to local manufacturing tax, while export subsidies tend to displace exports? Right. Okay, we'll come back to it. We'll come back to it and we'll see. Okay, so 22 was incorrect. 22. 20 we said is B. 20, sorry, C. 20 is C. 20 we said is C. So let's see. 20 is C. 19 is C. 19 is C. So 19 is also C. 18 we said is B. 18 we said is B. 18 is B. 17 is B. 17 is B. Right? 16 we had a clash. Right? You were saying C. I was saying D. So let's see 16. 16 is D. Okay. Now let me show you what question I'm talking about. 16 is D. Okay, yeah. So this is the question. Do you remember? We talked about this. So you took the difference, whereas I, right? In this question, it said, by how much will the government have to spend to increase the market price? By how much the government have to spend to increase the market price to $10, right? And for that, I said it would be, it would be 4,000. So now does it make sense, or do you want me to explain you again? Have a look at this. So I said that the demand has to be increased by this level, by this much, to increase the equilibrium price to 10. Now, what it basically means that you are having an additional, the government is increasing demand by how much quantity? 400 units. And for 400 units, the price would be 10, right? So what I said was that 400 times $10 would mean that total spending of $4,000 the government has to make, right? Does it make sense? Let's look at this one more time. So Abdul, think about this. The question set shows the national market equilibrium price for $6 and 800 units, right? Okay, now the thing is that the government, by how much the government has to spend to increase the market price to $10, right? Now to increase the market price to $10, we know that the demand curve should intersect at this point so that the overall market is 10% is the equilibrium price and 800 is the equilibrium quantity, right? Now, by how much is the demand increasing? First, you have to see what is this distance? What is this distance between the demand curves? So it is this much because previous demand curve is at this level. Are you getting me or not? Are you following? So previous demand curve was at somewhere over this, right? This level, and the new demand curve is over here, right? So then what it actually means is that you're increasing the demand by this much quantity, the vertical distance, right? What is the vertical, like horizontal distance between the two? 400 units. Are you getting me or not? So the vertical distance between two demand curves is 400 units, right? So 400 times 10, it will be the original new equilibrium price, new equilibrium price. So 400 times 10, because the new price has to be 10, so the government would be spending, buying the product at $10 each. So that will give you 4,000. That will give you 4,000 then, right? Right. Okay. Now 15, we said 15. Let's see, what is 15 here? So 15 was B, and we selected 15 to be A. Okay. Why is 15 A? Okay, 15 X, Y, and Z are all proportional. X, Y, and Z are all proportional. So what was the definition of proportional tax? When the rate of tax is the same. Rate of the tax is the same. So everyone is paying tax paid. High the income, high the tax paid. 15 is B. X, Y, and Z are all proportional. Do you remember the definition of proportional taxes? Amdureen, do you remember the definition of proportional taxes? So proportional taxes are basically when the rate of tax is the same, right? So amount would obviously be different because people with more incomes will be paying more amount in taxes, right? But the rate of tax is constant, right? The rate of tax is constant. Rate of tax is constant and is regardless of for all levels of income. Let's for all levels of income, right? So since all of these are starting from the origin, right? Since all of these are starting from the origin, it goes like this, it goes like this, and this one goes like this, right? So the tax rate is the same, but people with higher incomes are paying more about the taxes. Tax paid. More incomes are paying more amount in taxes. Interesting. right? Or we can just quickly Google um, this is progressive, this is progressive, this is proportional, this is regressive. Tax paid and income. Since these are straight lines, okay, get it, get it. Did you get this? So have a look at this. Have a look at this. Abdul Rahim. So if it's upward sloping, so on the y-axis, have a look at this. On the y-axis, you have tax paid, and on the x-axis, you have income, right? Now, if it's a straight line, Abdul Rahim, if it's a straight line, it means, have a look at this. Now you will get this clear, right? So if this is the amount of tax that taxpayers are paying, and on the x-axis, you have income. So if you have a graph that goes like this, right? It's upward sloping. This means that any small increase in income is resulting a big amount of tax paid, right? So that would be your progressive. If it's a straight line from the origin, it's proportional. So this is proportional. This is progressive. And the one that bends towards x-axis would be regressive. And the third one goes like this, right? Somewhat like this. So that would be regressive. Right. Does it make sense? So since in our question, the three lines were straight upward sloping. The three lines were straight upward sloping. Okay, yeah, sure. We can do that. We can do that. Okay, so let's stop here for today and tomorrow we'll continue from here, right? Okay, so I'll see you then. Take care. Allah Hafiz.